I want to walk you through something I said once on a hillside above the Sea of Galilee. People had followed me from Galilee, from the 10 towns, from Jerusalem, even from beyond the Jordan. Sick, tired, curious, worn out by teachers who gave them rules but no life. Some of them had walked for days. Some had carried relatives who couldn't walk at all. I climbed the hill and sat down, and they gathered around, sitting on the grass, some standing at the edges, children weaving between the adults. What I said that day has been called many things since. A sermon, a manifesto, a teaching, even a constitution for a different kind of kingdom. I was simply trying to tell them what life actually looks like when heaven rules it instead of fear. I want to walk you through the whole thing today, start to finish. Not as scattered quotes pulled out of context, but as one continuous thought, the way it was actually spoken. It's long, but it's really about one thing underneath all of it: how to actually live, not just how to behave. By the time I sat down that day, people had heard plenty of religious teaching in their lives. Every synagogue had a teacher. Every festival had someone quoting the law. What they hadn't heard, at least not in a long time, was someone speak about God the way you'd speak about a father you actually knew and trusted, instead of a distant judge you were constantly trying to appease. Most of what they'd absorbed growing up was a religion of managing risk. Do enough right things, avoid enough wrong things, and hope it balances out. I wasn't interested in giving them a better risk management system. I was trying to describe an entirely different way of being human. One built on trust instead of anxiety, on an identity that's given rather than earned, on a father who already knows what's needed before it's asked for. That's the thread running underneath every single thing I said that afternoon, even in the parts that sound, on the surface, like hard rules. I didn't start with rules. I started with who gets to be called happy, and that surprised everyone listening, because it wasn't who they expected. I said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, the ones who don't pretend they have it all together, who know honestly how much they need God, who have stopped performing strength they don't feel. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Not the kingdom might be theirs someday, but is theirs now, already. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Not because grief is good in itself, but because the ones who let themselves grieve honestly, instead of numbing it or rushing past it, are the ones who actually find comfort, the real kind, not the shallow kind that just distracts you until the next wave comes. Blessed are the meek. And I don't mean weak. I mean those who hold their strength with control instead of using it to force their way through every room they walk into. For they will inherit the earth, not the loud and the pushy, but the ones who know how to hold power gently. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness the way a starving person thinks about bread, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. What you give away has a strange way of finding its way back to you. Blessed are the pure in heart, the ones who aren't carrying two sets of motives, one for show and one underneath, for they will see God clearly, without the fog that a divided heart creates. Blessed are the peacemakers, not peace lovers, not people who avoid conflict, but people who actively make peace, which is harder and costs more. For they will be called children of God, because that's exactly what their Father does. And blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness. Blessed are you when people insult you and lie about you and come after you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because your reward is great, and that's exactly how they treated the prophets before you. Think about what that actually meant for the people sitting in front of me. Some of them had buried children that year. Some of them owed money they couldn't repay. Some of them had been quietly excluded from the religious life of their town because they didn't look righteous enough on the outside, even though nobody knew what was happening in their hearts. I wasn't speaking in theory to people with comfortable lives. I was looking at real faces. A widow near the back, a man with a shaking hand, a mother who hadn't slept properly in weeks, and telling each of them specifically, you are not disqualified. You are not behind. You are, right now, exactly the kind of person this kingdom was built for. And that's still true wherever you are as you hear this. If you feel like you don't have your spiritual life figured out, if you're grieving something you haven't told anyone about, if you've spent years trying to be strong because you thought that was the only way to be respected, I'm not describing a hurdle you have to clear before blessing becomes available to you. I'm describing where blessing already starts. Notice, not one word in any of that about success, status, wealth, influence, winning. I turned the whole value system upside down in the first few lines before I'd even said anything about how to behave. The world you live in tells you, blessed are the strong, blessed are the winners, blessed are the people with the most, the loudest, the best defended. I said the opposite from the very first sentence. Blessed are the honest. Blessed are the grieving. Blessed are the ones who want truth more than comfort. Blessed are the ones who get hurt for doing the right thing. This wasn't a message for people who already had it together. It was a word for the tired, the poor in spirit, the ones who cry at night when no one's watching. And I told them first, before anything else, before any instruction, you are already blessed. Not you will be blessed if you manage to do everything right. You are blessed now in the middle of the mess. And I told them two things about who they already were before I told them what to do. Because that order matters more than people realize. You are the salt of the earth. Not become salt someday. Not try to earn the title of salt. You already are salt. Salt in that world did more than season food. It preserved meat from rotting in a climate with no refrigeration. It was valuable enough that soldiers were sometimes paid partly in it. I said, but if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's good for nothing except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. And you are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hidden, no matter how hard it tries. The geography itself gives it away. No one lights a lamp and hides it under a basket. They put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house, not just the corner nearest to it. Before I told you how to live, I told you who you are. Not be good enough, and eventually you'll earn the right to be called light. But you already are light. So stop hiding it and live like what you already are. Let your light shine before others so that they see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven, not so they glorify you. I want you to sit with that for a moment because it's easy to hear it and move on too quickly. Most people spend their lives waiting for permission, waiting to feel qualified enough, spiritual enough, put together enough before they let themselves matter to the people around them. I skipped that waiting entirely. I told a crowd full of ordinary, unimpressive, unfinished people that they were already salt and already light, in the same breath as telling them they were blessed while poor in spirit and while mourning. The identity came first. The living it out came second. If you try to reverse that order, if you try to earn your way into being light before you'll believe you already are light, you'll spend your whole life performing instead of shining, and performance always runs out of fuel eventually. Belief doesn't. I said something that confused a lot of people that day, and it still confuses people now. Don't think I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I didn't come to abolish them, but to fulfill them, to bring out everything they were always pointing toward. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. People who had known the scriptures their entire lives, who had memorized them as children, expected me to say, forget the old rules, we're starting fresh. I said almost the opposite. But then I went somewhere they didn't expect. I said, you've heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister without cause will be subject to judgment. Again, you have heard it said, 'Do not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. It has also been said, 'Anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce.' A rule that had been twisted into an excuse for men to discard their wives for almost any reason. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made.' But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one, because a life of integrity doesn't need an elaborate system of oaths to be trusted. Your plain word should already be enough. Think about why people build elaborate systems of oaths in the first place. Swearing on this, swearing by that, escalating the language until a promise finally sounds believable. It only happens in a culture where plain words have stopped being trustworthy on their own. I wasn't handing down a rule about vocabulary. I was pointing at something underneath it. A kind of integrity so consistent that a simple yes actually means yes every time without needing reinforcement. And the teaching about divorce, hard as it was for people to hear that day, came from the same place. Marriage wasn't meant to be something discarded the moment it became inconvenient. And I was defending the people, mostly women in that culture, who had no power to protect themselves once a husband decided he was finished. Underneath both of these, oaths and divorce, is the same concern. Don't build a life on words and commitments that can be abandoned the instant they stop being convenient. Build it on commitments strong enough to survive being tested. I wasn't canceling the law that day. I was showing its real depth, the depth it always had, but that people had learned to ignore. They had learned to think of righteousness as a checklist of external things they hadn't done. Hadn't murdered, hadn't slept with someone else's spouse, hadn't broken a formal vow. I was telling them righteousness starts much deeper than that, in the heart, in what you allow to grow inside you long before it ever becomes an action anyone else can see. This wasn't, now there are more rules and they're harder to follow. This was obeying only on the outside while your heart stays exactly the same, was never actually the life of the kingdom. It just looked like it from a distance. You can spend an entire life avoiding every external violation on that list and still be a stranger to what I was actually asking for. You can never once raise your voice and still be full of contempt for someone. You can never once act on an impulse and still let it live rent-free in your imagination for years. I wasn't handing people a harder exam. I was telling them the exam they thought they were taking was the wrong exam entirely. The real question was never simply, what did you avoid doing? The real question was, and still is, what is actually alive in you when no one is watching and nothing is stopping you? I said one more thing that day that's still hard for almost everyone who hears it, including people who've called themselves my followers for decades. You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. A rule that was actually meant to limit revenge, to keep punishment proportional instead of endless. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. And then the hardest part of all. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the pagans do that? I know how that sounds when you actually sit with it. It isn't naivety, and it isn't weakness, and it isn't asking you to pretend you weren't hurt. It's the hardest kind of strength there is, because hating back happens on its own, without any effort at all. It's the easiest thing in the world. Choosing to love the person who actually hurt you, who actually wronged you, costs everything you have, every single time you choose it. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. And the word there doesn't mean flawless. It means whole, complete, undivided, not split into one love for the easy people and a different posture for everyone who's difficult. I want to be clear about something, because people twist this into something it was never meant to be. Loving an enemy doesn't mean pretending you weren't wronged, and it doesn't mean staying in a place where someone keeps hurting you. It doesn't erase the need for justice, or for boundaries, or for consequences. What it does is refuse to let the other person's cruelty write the next chapter of who you become. Every act of revenge, even the smallest one, hands your heart over to the very person who already hurt it once. Love, in this sense, is the only way to keep your own heart out of someone else's hands. It's not weakness. It's the only form of freedom that actually holds up under pressure. Then I talked about something else, about what people do to be seen, and about what needs to stay quietly between you and the Father, unseen by anyone else. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans who think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. This, then, is how you should pray. And I gave them, and I'm giving you again, the words that people have prayed for 2,000 years since in more languages than I could count. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Notice how short that prayer actually is. It isn't built to impress anyone with the length of the speech or the sophistication of the language. It's built entirely around trust. Give us what we need for today, not for a lifetime stored up in advance. Forgive us in the same measure we're willing to forgive. And lead us, because we can't find our own way through temptation on our own strength. For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins either. Because an unforgiving heart can't actually receive forgiveness, even when it's offered. It's already closed. And when you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father, who is unseen. And your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. All three of these, giving, praying, fasting, point at the exact same thing. Don't turn your relationship with God into a performance staged for an audience of other people. Live it for real, in the quiet, in the room with the door closed, in front of the only one who is actually watching in the first place. Think about how much of a person's spiritual life today happens in public. Posted, shared, narrated for an audience, measured by how it's received. None of that is automatically wrong. But I was warning about something specific. The moment the applause becomes the point, the reward has already been paid out in full, and there's nothing left to receive later. The quiet version. The version nobody claps for. The version that happens in a closed room with no one to impress is the only version that actually reaches the Father, because it was never performed for anyone else to begin with. Ask yourself what you would still do if no one ever found out. That's usually the truest measure of what you actually believe. And I said something that becomes a turning point for a lot of people the moment they actually hear it. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. This was never just a warning about money, though people often hear it that way and stop there. It's a diagnosis. Ask yourself honestly, what is your heart actually chasing underneath the version of your life you describe out loud? Where do your thoughts wander when nobody's checking, when there's nothing to perform for? What's sitting underneath your everyday decisions, the ones that feel too small to examine? The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. People rarely announce out loud that money has become their master. It happens quietly in the accumulation of small decisions. The job taken for the salary instead of the calling. The relationship strained because work always wins. The generosity that gets postponed until there's finally enough, which somehow never arrives. Money itself was never the enemy in anything I said that day. The danger was always in what happens when it moves from being a tool in your hand to being the thing your hand reaches for first, the thing your security is actually built on instead of merely resting near. A servant can be moved by its master in any direction at all. That's the real question behind the treasure and the two masters. Not how much you have, but who's actually driving. And then I told them what I've told you before in another conversation we've had. About the birds, about the wildflowers, about a Father who already knows exactly what you need before you find the words to ask for it. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they are? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and thrown into the fire tomorrow, will he not much more clothe you? You of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. That single line isn't a separate topic dropped into the middle of the sermon. It's the hinge the whole thing turns on. Everything I said before this point and everything I say after it circles back to one question, over and over, from different angles. What's actually first in your life? Not what you'd say is first if someone asked you directly, but what's actually first, underneath, in the place where your attention and your worry and your effort really go. I wasn't telling those farmers and fishermen and mothers and day laborers to stop planning, stop working, stop preparing for winter. Some of them would go home that evening and still have to mend nets or grind grain or figure out how to stretch what little they had. What I was naming was the posture underneath the labor. Whether they worked from trust or worked from dread, whether their planning came from wisdom or from the belief that if they didn't personally control every outcome, disaster was certain. Worry doesn't actually add anything to your life except the wear of carrying tomorrow's weight today, on top of today's weight, which is already enough on its own. Seeking the kingdom first doesn't mean doing less. It means carrying what you carry with open hands instead of a clenched jaw. I said one more difficult thing, and this one people love to quote at other people and hate to apply to themselves. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, "Let me take the speck out of your eye," when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. People find it remarkably easy to spot someone else's small mistake from across the room, and remarkably hard to notice the much larger thing sitting in their own chest. I wasn't asking anyone that day to stop telling right from wrong altogether, to pretend nothing matters. I was asking them to start with honesty about themselves before they turned their attention to correcting anyone else. And then I gave them a promise that's been repeated in more languages, in more difficult seasons of life, than almost anything else I said that day. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you, then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. That last line was never meant to be a small, tidy, motivational phrase for a poster. It was meant to be the compressed version of everything the law and the prophets had ever been trying to say. Treat the person in front of you the way you'd want to be treated if your positions were reversed. Notice how these two ideas sit right next to each other in what I said. Asking, seeking, knocking, trusting a Father who gives good gifts, and then immediately treat other people the way you'd want to be treated. That's not a coincidence. The confidence to actually treat someone else well, even when it costs you, even when they don't deserve it, comes from already trusting that your own needs are held by someone bigger than the situation in front of you. People who are secretly terrified they won't get enough for themselves find it almost impossible to be generous toward others. Trust comes first. Generosity follows. It's very hard to reverse that order and have it last. Toward the end of that afternoon, I spoke more directly because the light was starting to change, and the most important things still needed to be said plainly without softening them. Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit you will recognize them. I said this because the narrow road was never going to be the popular one, and I wanted people to walk into it with their eyes open, rather than be surprised later that it cost them something. The wide road doesn't announce itself as dangerous. It looks reasonable, even sensible, most of the time. It's simply the direction everyone else is already walking, the path of least resistance, the choices that require no explanation to anyone around you. The narrow gate, by contrast, often looks like a loss from the outside. Fewer options, fewer excuses, a smaller crowd walking alongside you. And false teaching tends to thrive precisely because it borrows the language of the narrow road while quietly leading people down the wide one. Which is why I told them to stop evaluating teachers by how convincing they sounded and start watching what their lives actually produced over time. Fruit takes longer to fake than words do. And then I said something that still sobers a lot of people the first time they really hear it, especially people who've spent years being religiously active. Not everyone who says to me, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, "Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles?" Then I will tell them plainly, "I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers." This was never meant to scare you into some kind of anxious performance. It was meant to be honest about something people avoid facing. That words alone, even impressive religious activity, even things that look powerful from the outside, don't automatically replace a real relationship and a real, lived-out change of direction. And then I told them the story you may already know, the one that closed the whole afternoon. Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. The difference between those two men was never that one of them heard more than the other, or heard some deeper secret the other one missed. Both of them heard exactly the same words, sitting on the same hillside in the same afternoon light. The only difference was that one of them actually built his life on what he heard, and the other one just let the words pass through him and moved on with his day unchanged. When I finished speaking, the crowds were amazed at my teaching because I taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. So let me pull this whole afternoon together for you now, the way I would if we were sitting with it together. I never gave you a checklist to work through and check off one item at a time. I was showing you, piece by piece, what life actually looks like from the inside when heaven rules it instead of fear, instead of unchecked anger, instead of the constant need to prove something to somebody, instead of the pull toward revenge, instead of the low hum of anxiety about tomorrow's bread and tomorrow's clothes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, not the ones pretending to have it together. You are already salt. You are already light, whether you feel like it some mornings or not. Not anger held on to and nursed, but real reconciliation, pursued even when it's uncomfortable. Not revenge, but love, even for the person who wronged you, especially for that person. Not performance for an audience, but quiet honesty in the room with the door shut. Not treasure that rusts and gets stolen, but the kingdom sought first, before anything else gets to claim that place. Not quick judgment of everyone around you, but a hard, honest look at your own heart first. And finally, not just hearing any of this and nodding along, but actually doing it, letting it change the shape of an ordinary Tuesday. So ask yourself, honestly, The way I asked the people on that hillside to ask themselves, what are you building your house on right now, today, not someday? What's it actually resting on, underneath the surface? Other people's opinions of you, which shift constantly, like sand under your feet with every wave. Money, which has a way of rusting or disappearing exactly when you need it most. The effort of trying to look right on the outside while nothing underneath has changed. Or on rock. On words that have actually been lived out, put into practice, day after ordinary day, and not merely heard once and admired. The rain is going to come for you too. Not might come, will come, sooner or later, the way it comes for everyone eventually. There is really only one question underneath everything I said that afternoon on the hill. What is your house standing on when it does? Most people who heard me that afternoon went home and life carried on exactly as before. The same arguments with the same relatives, the same worry about the same debts, the same old patterns of anger and comparison and performance. Hearing wasn't the hard part. It rarely is. The hard part is the specific, unglamorous, repeated choice to actually live differently on an afternoon nobody's watching. To forgive the one person you'd rather stay angry at. To give without announcing it. To trust instead of scheming. To tell the truth instead of managing your image. To want righteousness the way you want your next meal instead of treating it as optional. None of that happens in one dramatic moment. It happens the way a house gets built. One deliberate choice at a time, laid down on rock instead of sand, long before any storm arrives to test it. Go and think about that honestly, without rushing past it the way it's easy to rush past. And when you're ready, not just to listen one more time, but to actually act on what you've heard, you'll understand what that whole hour on the hillside was really about, and what this hour with you has been about too.